in a way, it was kind of frustrating because I'd studied in England by myself for a couple of years. I could read manga, and I thought, oh, yeah, I know Japanese. And when I got to Japan, I was like, nope, don't know anything.
Hey everyone, this is Daniel from HowToJapanese.com. Longtime readers may remember the single episode of a podcast I tried to start years ago. Well, we're not counting that one anymore. I've left it online for completionist listeners to track down, but you're going to have to find it yourself. This time, I'm starting over and it's the real thing. The new How to Japanese podcast has two goals. First and foremost, I want to help you get used to Japanese. I remember struggling with parts of the language when I first started studying. Later on, after I got used to things a little, I wondered why I hadn't been able to shift my thinking in little ways here and there that would have helped me better grasp parts of the language. Why hadn't I realized that des is basically is to a certain extent? Why didn't I know that desma style was a form of polite speech? Why couldn't I get it through my head that totte kudasai is how you say pass the butter? How to Japanese the blog started with me trying to dig into some of these things. The second goal of the podcast is to help demystify studying, living, and working in Japan and with Japanese, both the language and the people. I'm really curious to know how others began studying the language, what that process was like for them, how long it took them to get to fluency, and what their experience has been like in Japan. Not everyone I talked to intended to stay in Japan long term, but others looked for opportunities to commit to the language.
My idea was to only spend 1 year in Japan and then leave.
But later, luckily, I managed to get myself to the position where I could get a revenge year of study abroad, and that was when I moved to Japan 7 years ago.
Everyone has struggled with the language at some point, but hard work has also paid off.
The first month or so felt more like a bit of a silent period. I could kind of receive things, but it was really difficult to get into like more of a Japanese mode that I'm going to just communicate in Japanese.
I mean, you can only go as far as, you're willing to put in the work for, and even then it's always an uphill battle.
And then there's the one question that nearly everyone gets asked once they start studying the language.
What are you going to do with Japanese? There's no jobs for that.
But there are jobs for people who study Japanese, and there are a lot of interesting stories about the kind of work that is available.
I got a job at Nova, and then I was at Nova for a year before the Japan Times. And then my first day at the Japan Times, Nova went bankrupt. It was the cover story.
As a translator and writer myself, I plan to ask a lot of questions about the translation process and best practices. How do you break into the world of freelance translation, and how do you become a better translator?
So I didn't have to separately study the terminology. I was getting the terminology as I worked.
And, of course, I wanted to know about the biggest challenge that all foreigners face in Japan.
I know everyone says natto immediately.
Yeah, yappari natto desu.
Natto wa dame nan desu.
Natto.
まあ、納豆と言ったらつまんないでしょ。
Never が大変。
One thing that's become more apparent to me since starting this project is that there are nearly limitless paths to fluency in Japanese. Everyone's experience is going to be different. There's nothing that you have to do other than to put in the time studying, and by doing so, to find your own path to fluency. I'm planning to release the podcast in 10-episode seasons, with the first season starting soon. I hope that these guests and I can serve as a sort of digital senpai, or even just a look into different possibilities that maybe listeners haven't considered. If you have any questions or nayami goto, feel free to send them my way at howtojapanese@gmail.com. You can also find How to Japanese on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. それではまた来週.